Hi, I'm Nigel, and many of you will be surprised to know that I'm an introvert. Before we get started today, I want to try a little bit of an experiment. If you take your arms and fold them, now look down. Many people in the room are going to have their right arm on top, and many people in the room are going to have their left arm on top. Now I want you to swap over so that the other arm is on top. Now for most people this will feel quite awkward. And this is what it feels like if you're an introvert and you're learning to be an extrovert to express yourself in an extrovert world. New Zealand is a country that's full of introverts. If you go to a rugby match at Eden Park, you'll notice how people sit there in black silently as the team comes onto the field. In contrast, if you were to go to England or Wales, you'd hear them singing in full voice. This brilliant book here by Susan Cain called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, goes deep into the concept of how introverts exist within society and how they are often undervalued and how much we lose in not paying attention to introverts. Introverts listen more than they talk. They think before they speak. They express themselves better in writing than they do in conversation. They dislike conflict, and they dislike small talk, although they really enjoy deep conversations, one-on-one or in small groups. Now, a common misconception is that introverted people are shy. Introversion is not the same as being shy. Shy means that you are concerned about how you will present in a public environment, whereas introversion means that you avoid situations where it is overstimulating. So Richard Branson is the poster child of extroversion. Often he's painted as the greatest leader or the rebel playboy who stands out and expresses himself and makes other people want to follow. In contrast, Bill Gates is the poster child for introversion. Many people see Bill Gates as a great leader, but he does this in a different way, and he is really quite introverted. The internet and social media has created a new channel for us all to connect with each other. And introverts thrive online. Operating online, you need to understand your audience before you can reach them. And as a lot of campaigns and marketing is moving online, we have to be aware of this change in relation to the way that people communicate. It's a brilliant book by marketing guru Seth Godin that was released in 2011. The book is called We Are All Weird, and it observes the death of Blockbuster and welcomes the rise of niches. The key tenet in the book is that in a world where there is no longer a single channel, you can sort after smaller groups with niche interests, and you can communicate and feel part of that. So it's no longer good enough to have one channel to market. You now need to connect with the niches that you want to reach and engage with. Understanding what drives people helps us to connect with them. Myself, I like mentioning before that I'm an introvert. I like to recharge my batteries alone. And one of the ways that I really enjoy to do that is to go snowboarding. There's nothing better than being up a mountain on a clear blue day and snowboarding by myself. When I'm in that zone of snowboarding, or when I'm coding, or when I'm running, or when I'm even preparing this presentation, I find myself getting into a state called flow. Now flow, Professor Mihail from Hungary talked about flow as the psychology of optimal experience. And for anyone who's familiar with just getting in the zone or getting into doing one thing, that's kind of the concept of flow. You're really productive. You can be doing it alone, or you can be doing it in a group where you're just bouncing off each other. Ideas are flowing very fast and outcomes are being delivered.
Here we are, 2013. We all depend on technology to communicate, to bank, and none of us know how to read and write code.
The first program I wrote asked things like, what's your favorite color? Or how old are you?
I wrote a program to play tic-tac-toe.
I first learned how to make a green circle and a red square appear on the screen.
You're just trying to make something, trying to transfer something from your mind to the computer or to a tablet. It's it's an experience.
The whole limit in the system is just that there just aren't enough people who are trained and have these skills today.
The programmers of tomorrow are the wizards of the future. You know, you're going to look like you have magic powers compared to everybody else.
Great coders are today's rock stars. That's it.
What I'm finding more and more with the changing society is that people are coming together online to create new things and new businesses. And this isn't just about the coders, it's not just about the developers, it's about the industry changing and people coming together and creating the next generation of Kiwi entrepreneurs. We're very involved with a competition at Microsoft in New Zealand called the Imagine Cup, where we get students together who are a connection of design, coding and business students who will create and pitch ideas and develop them up to compete on the world stage. And just a couple of weekends ago, Microsoft were a strong supporter of the Auckland Startup Weekend. I spent the weekend mentoring 100 people, and there was 100 more on the waiting list who tried to get to the event. And maybe a quarter of those were developers, a quarter designers, and a quarter entrepreneurs and business people. And they were coming together to create like-minded opportunities to start and build their own new businesses. So this concept of change is well described in Daniel Pink's breakthrough book from 2006 called A Whole New Mind. In the book, Daniel talks about beyond the information age is the conceptual age. So we think about the agricultural age, moving into the industrial age, then moving into the information age, and he was really talking about a further change which is moving to the conceptual age. In the book, Dan talks about how we've traditionally been carried by the left hemisphere of our brain and left aptitude thinking, which is the logic, the detail, the focus, the execution. And he argues that that is no longer good enough to serve us in a world where outsourcing is becoming a reality and core, basic jobs are being automated. And to stand out in the conceptual age, it's also about using the right-hand side of your brain, the one that was often just used in the weekends or when you're outside of the office. And to put those two things together, it comes up with a powerful thinking machine. And he also calls that using either on its own, the result can be bizarre or absurd. We must master aptitudes which are high touch, high concept, and also become more proficient at right-directed thinking. So enter evangelism. The concept of evangelism is the practice of relaying information about a particular set of beliefs to others with the object of conversion. A technology evangelist is a person who builds a critical mass of support for a given technology. Guy Kawasaki was a former chief evangelist at Apple Computer. In fact, Guy introduced evangelism to Silicon Valley in the early years of Apple, and he wrote a book about it in 1991 called Selling the Dream. Just a couple of weeks ago, Guy Kawasaki was here in New Zealand, brought down for a social media breakfast within New Zealand, and he talks all this time, all these decades on, about the concepts again of technical evangelism. Says you earn the right to tell your story by providing value, and the effects of getting people to believe, who then get more people to believe, is the word of mouth, the traditional word of mouth marketing approach, which seems to scale out really well online. For Microsoft, Robert Scoble came to Microsoft from the community in 2003, and part of his role was to tell inside stories within Microsoft. The then director of evangelism at Microsoft, Len Pryor, in 2004 was on a plane and he was afraid of flying, and he was comforted by the pilot who told him to tune into Channel 9 so he could listen to the correspondence between the pilots in the cockpit and the air traffic control. And as a result of listening to Channel 9, he calmed his nerves, but then he also thought about how to take evangelism from one-to-one to one-to-many as the technology was evolving. So he came up with the concept of Channel 9 for Microsoft, where we would share blogs and also share video stories of what was going on within the company to put a human face on what was previously thought of as a closed shop. He started Channel 9, and these stats were just from last Saturday night. There was 122,000 people online, with users signing up in rapid numbers. And this is decades on, it's continuing to be a large channel to market for our internal audiences and our large events.
Who are you?
I'm Bill Gates, Chief Software Architect at Microsoft.
A few weeks ago, we interviewed Mark McDonald, the first Microsoft employee, right? And he told us about when Microsoft started, they were in a small apartment, the whole dev team. What's the most surprising thing that's happened to Microsoft since those early days, or to you?
Well, I think the most amazing thing is that the dream that we had back then about the importance of software and that this whole personal computer thing would happen, that's actually become a reality.
If there's one technology trend to pay attention to right now, what is it?
Well, I think people underestimate how natural interface will change things.
It's hard to come up with hard questions for you because you've heard every question in the book.
I don't know.
What would be the question you would be asking if you were in my chair? Of the guy who started Microsoft.
Well, it's, people often talk about, have we seen the best days in software? And, I know that's not the case. It is interesting that in some ways, in terms of the field of study, people going into college, software is not as big as it used to be. A college tour this year. I did one last year. I'm going to another 6 campuses to really get people invigorated about the opportunities that we've all got.
Now, Bill Gates has continued to use online channels to communicate with broad audiences. Just a couple of months ago, he was on Reddit running a session called Ask Me Anything. And the reaction and the engagement that he got from doing that online session were quite incredible. I started as a technology evangelist at Microsoft in April 2005. It's about 8 years ago. And when I started at Microsoft, about a year later, there was work that was done with Hugh McLeod. Hugh McLeod came up with this symbol for Microsoft called the Blue Monster. And this became the rally sign for technical evangelism around the time. The symbol of our outside appearance, which is this big, unmovable blue beast. And then this concept that we were people within it who created the organization, who were there motivated to change the world or to go home. I've kept a blog for the past 8 years, and it reminds me as a bit of a scrapbook for the journey that I've taken. Technology evangelism has evolved a lot since the early days of Guy Kawasaki and Robert Scoble. But at its heart, it still has the essence of flow, creation, storytelling, and scaling through others. Despite being a director at Microsoft, I still code, and I still find myself engaged with writing applications and creating new things which can be used by thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. Coming back to Dan Pink's book, A Whole New Mind, he talks about to master our directed thinking, we must do work that is aesthetic, spiritual, and emotional, as well as being functional and relevant. He introduces a set of R-directed aptitudes to add to the L-directed aptitudes, the left brain aptitudes that we're used to today. And I just want to take a moment to go through these and to talk about the change in focus. So if we think about the first one, function, which is your left brain aptitude, and design, which is your right brain aptitude, it's no longer good enough to just create something, an application, a product which is functional. It also needs to be well designed. Good design is a Renaissance attitude that combines technology, cognitive science, human need, and beauty to produce something that the world didn't know it was missing. All true artists, whether they know it or not, create from a place of no mind, from inner stillness. Microsoft is pioneering a new design language that's authentically digital and based on aesthetics and human interaction. If there's any photographers in the room, you may look at this photo and find it aesthetically pleasing, but not necessarily know why. And then when we apply a grid to this photo, you'll notice that it's well laid out based on the proportions and the grids within the image. Human beings are hardwired to find certain proportions and spatial relationships more pleasing than others. This is known as the rule of thirds. Take another example here. This photo, I took this shot, and after I took the shot, I've actually rotated it and set it up so it maximizes the rules based on the rule of thirds. When I apply the grid, you'll see the focus points in the image, and you'll see also the areas of the image which are intentionally left blank. This is the magic number in nature, 1.618. For a lot of people, you may recognize this as the golden ratio. And this is the proportion relationship that comes up again and again when we think of the natural world. Example here in the shell in my daughter's hand, or this shell unraveling, it's all following that proportion of 1.168. And what that is that it is A plus B is to A as A is to B. We think about this in the human body. I could take my foot and put it up, and it's the same length as from my elbow to my wrist. Now, designers have known about the golden ratio for some time, and you'll see it popping up all over the place. Leonardo da Vinci spent a lot of time with the golden ratio, and also the new Twitter logo has been designed using the golden ratio in circles. Microsoft with Windows 8 has started to focus on the grid layout and proportion and the ratios to create a consistent look and feel that developers can add the design language to the applications that they're building. For an example here, if we look at the New Zealand apps, the NZ Herald, you'll notice the grid structure applied over that. Tweetro, the same grid, and Sky TV is the same grid as well. But as we expect, we'll start out with some basic kind of grids and proportions, but as people become more comfortable with this language, the grids will go away and the innovation will start to happen outside of the space of those squares. It's an example here of MetroTube that's been built by Asher and Michael down in Christchurch, which is a great example of extending the design language. And this is not something that is new. This is something that's been well known in print for a long, long time. There's examples here of the Rolling Stone magazine where they have their type ramp, their grid layout, and what they're doing with these magazine covers is they're innovating on top of that grid, but the instant recognition of the fact that that's the cover of Rolling Stone or the cover of Wired magazine is because of the proportion, layout, type ramp, and grid. So that is the design, the function plus design. The next aptitude is empathy. So if we think about previously needing the requirement for logic, we also require in a conceptual world empathy. People who thrive will be distinguished by their abilities to realize what makes others tick, their ability to build relationships, and their power to care about others. What we've done here in New Zealand is that instead of just looking at standard personas based on market data, we've actually looked at the people themselves who are building the applications for Windows apps in New Zealand. And I've modeled those out on a plane from left plane to right plane. So we can start to build personas around these individuals based on their real world interests and their real world motivations. And by understanding the audience in this way, it enables us to better engage with them and to communicate and deliver a message. The next area is accumulation plus meaning. So another example was in left world or information age, it was okay to accumulate outcomes, to come to work through a process, to deliver X number of widgets at the end of the day. But we're moving beyond that to a world where we have to actually also gather meaning. Relationships are actually a great source of finding meaning. So a great example is the story that sits behind the creation of meetup.com. This site was co-founded by Scott Hefferman in New York City soon after September 11 in 2001. And what Scott noticed was that the event of 2001 and September 11 attacks made him realize that although there was a lot of people living in New York, they didn't spend a lot of time getting out and connecting with each other. So he created meetup.com as a way of, like I was saying with Seth Godin's book, We're All Weird, of bringing together niches of like-minded people to meet in the real world to deliver personal relationships. And since then, Meetup has spanned to tens of millions of meetups, millions of registrations for people for meetups all over the world, and there's active meetup communities all across New Zealand. Seriousness plus play. It used to be that play was the one thing that was removed from work, and you couldn't have fun while you're on the job. In fact, the opposite of play isn't work, it's depression. And the conceptual age allows for intermingling of work and play.
So, on the back there, like that. Stick it on with some pins from the back, maybe.
Go in, kind of go out.
So I get to go there. Oh, yeah, okay.
It's an example where I got the team together for an off-site at Piha, and as well as learning and challenging ourselves in the planning process, I also got everybody together in groups and set tasks so that we could think creatively and come up with playful outcomes to problem solving. Now the other area is focus plus symphony. I talked a bit earlier about flow and getting in the zone and being focused. I think the downside of that process is that if you operate in silos, and if you're focused on a single outcome and you're not looking up and putting your head up and looking around to see how those parts can work together or how you can think about a problem holistically. So that's the concept of symphony. And symphony is, as it says, very much about taking lots of individual parts and creating something beautiful that didn't exist before. To make something new by combining previously unthought of pairs of elements. What I was trying to do was really inspire how photographs could tell the story of New Zealand and then connect with video to deliver back to an audience to make a really rich experience. So what I did to help Tim was that I sat down with him and I took him through what I'd created. And then he went away and made it 10 times better. He was able to show a huge number of greenstone tickies in this amazing interaction where people could zoom in over the internet as well as in the museum and see incredible detail on each tikkie, something that had never been done before. And he could tell the story of refugees coming into New Zealand by creating visual images of their faces using photographs that formed a mosaic. What Te Papa was able to create was a space called the Mixing Room, where people could visit the museum and it told the story of these refugees. And the final one I wanted to discuss was the concept of argument plus story. Now I think both are important, but I'm just going to demonstrate shortly the differences of the approach and how in isolation you almost need both. Stories are quite easy to memorize, and what matters is the ability to contextualize the fact and deliver them with an emotional impact. Here's an example of an argument. I could state a suggestive title like more developers build apps for Windows in New Zealand than any other platform. I could then back it up with data by saying that we've had 4,000 local developers downloading the tools for creating apps. We've had 1,200 developers registered on our stores, and they've released more than 600 apps onto our Windows platform. And given that New Zealand has 26,000 developers, about 5% of those have been registered to build apps for Windows. And 2 of those apps made for Windows Phone have more than 60,000 reviews and at a higher than 4.5 out of 5 rating. I could also say that Microsoft TechEd is New Zealand's largest technical conference and has 2,000 delegates and is in its 18th year here in New Zealand. Now this is a compelling argument, but I can almost guarantee when I move on to the next slide, you may have forgotten lots of the points and lots of the details that I've just mentioned. In contrast, I could tell you about Atta and Michael. Atta and Michael are a designer and developer based down in Christchurch. They were working in an office above the old mechanics. And when Windows Phone came out, they chose to have a go at it and to start building apps in their spare time to try and make a business out of it. Here is their story.
First app we released was a YouTube app. The first version that we released only took us about a week, and we sort of put it out on the marketplace. But the key thing is we were the only YouTube app on the marketplace, and this eventually led to MetroTube, which is now the highest rated and most downloaded third-party YouTube app on the platform, and it's currently in the top 1% out of all apps on the marketplace. With our Twitter app, we've already exceeded 100,000 downloads with our Twitter app, and Windows 8 hasn't even launched yet. You know, when this goes live, we could potentially be getting into the millions. Mike and I, we're just two guys. You know, we're a startup, small startup, and we're hitting it with we're building apps that, you know, Google could build. Just look at the people who jumped onto the iOS very early on. Look at the people who jumped onto Android early on. These particular opportunities do not come about often. It's not something that come every year, or, you know, entirely new platform and an entirely new marketplace with this many users is extremely exciting. To me, I see this as probably the biggest opportunity since the first launch of the smartphones.
You see the difference? I think you're going to remember the story about MetroTube. Another example here of an argument, I could put a bold title up there, like say Microsoft runs the largest, most successful startup program in New Zealand. I could talk about the 550 student teams that entered into the Microsoft Imagine Cup this year, which is the world's premier student competition, with over 2 million students from 190 countries competing over the last decade. Could talk about the fact that New Zealand has been in the top 6 for the last 3 years running, and our team that was on the news last week is flying out to St. Petersburg to compete in July. I could say we've had more than 82,000 downloads from students in New Zealand since July last year of our technology development software. And I could say that we've got 400 startups currently in our BizSpark program, and 200 of those startups have graduated from the program in New Zealand. Again, this is compelling information, but you may not remember those data points when I move on and start talking about the next story. This here is Ben O'Hale Station in Canterbury in the South Island. It's the scene of the Battle of Pelennor Fields in Lord of the Rings Return of the King. If you remember the scene, there were tens of thousands of riders of Rohan came running down a hill to engage in a battle with hundreds of thousands of orcs. And if you remember closely, if you've seen the movie, the scene shows every character is individually programmed so that they react differently within the scenes of the battle. It was quite a breakthrough in technology and movie making. Now the backstory behind this is that when they were coming to render the scene, there was not a lot of time left in the budget and not a lot of time left in to get the movie finished before it needed to be set up for the world premiere. So Peter Jackson talked to the then CTO of Weta Digital, Scott Houston, and said to him, I need you to render this scene quicker. So Scott ordered a whole bunch of more servers into their data center down in Wellington at Weta to render the scene. They flew in the servers, and then they spun them up, and they were able to render the scene in time. But as a result, they ended up with a lot of excess computing power after the movie was finished being built. So Scott partnered with Genai to come up with a process of allowing those servers to be used for other businesses in New Zealand that wanted to leverage them during the downtime. The problem was it was complex to get people using these servers because the automation process was missing. So what Scott did then was he talked about the problem, and he got together with a group of friends and came up with a concept of the green button. And the green button was a business that Scott was then able to leave Weta and form with another partner, Dave Fellows. And this business became supercomputing on demand. About the same time, Microsoft New Zealand started working with Scott and Dave Fellows, and we connected them with our new cloud computing platform, Windows Azure. And what we were doing was building a cloud computing platform which was globally scalable, that would enable the resources to be used on demand. So Dave and Scott got together and they built the first version of the green button on top of our new Windows Azure platform. As a result, they were able to offer a service where people, instead of when they were rendering their movie, instead of waiting for the 4 hours or the overnight to get their scene to render, they could actually press the green button, choose how much money they were prepared to pay, and that would adjust to the time it would take for them to get the result back. And following on from that, they were then able to develop and add the green button to lots of different platforms all over the world, including Pixar's RenderMan software, which is one of the leading 3D animation software on the planet, and also Right Hemisphere's 3D animation automation software for the aerospace industry. And In 2011, the green button was recognized as the Microsoft Windows Azure Partner of the Year at the Worldwide Partner Awards. And just last week at the New Zealand High Tech Awards, they were won the Emerging Company of the Year. So from their humble beginnings around rendering a scene for the Lord of the Rings through to the next generation of supercomputing companies, they followed through our startup program here in New Zealand, and now they're taking on the world. But of course, in any environment where you're moving from the information age to a conceptual age, or you're restructuring your organizations, you need to be able to manage change. To master the conceptual age, change is inevitable. And change in itself is quite simple. The concept of change is that something stops, there's a period of nothing, and then something begins. And what we call the period from where something's stopping to beginning is the transition. So there's a very famous response to negative change. This came out of the studies by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a doctor in Switzerland, who spent a lot of time with the dying and studying the dying as they were going through that process. And what she came up with was this view of the change in emotional response over time when people respond to negative change. And this plays out in most people at different levels depending on the extent of change that's required. Now, it's not always going to be that you follow negative change. Some people actually respond to positive change. And those people, if you can land change in a positive way, will work through a different cycle here, which shows pessimism on one side over time as a point of, as they work through the positive change cycle. The change formula, I keep coming back to this when I'm working with my team. Now this was developed by Richard Beckard and David Gletcher, and it comes up with a concept where whenever change occurs, you have to have the dissatisfaction with the current state times by the vision for the future by first steps needs to be greater than the resistance to change. So whenever you're invoking change within an organization or within people, what you need to do is paint a strong vision for the future and enable people to make the first steps. And then you have to keep that momentum in such a way so that it continues to be greater than the resistance, so that change will occur and remain permanent. In times of transformation, the role of the leader is to question their assumptions about what they do and how they do it. It's companies don't change, it's people that do. So if you need to change a company or you need to change a fundamental shift within your organization, you need to change the people first, and you need to change them in a positive way. Coming back to a quote from Bill Gates, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. Now, I've been through change many times in my life, and when I think back, I can kind of think back to a moment when I was 22. I'd been skiing my whole life. I'd been skiing since I was 5 years old. And when I'd finished university and I'd finished working in my first business, I thought I'd take some time off and spend a few months in Canada. Now at the time I really wanted to snowboard, but I didn't know how to snowboard. I only knew how to ski. So I did a bold statement of buying a new snowboard and going to Canada and not taking my skis, almost forcing myself to be a beginner. And while I was learning to snowboard, I came up with this poem. And this has taught me a lesson many times that I've replayed throughout my career and my life. Is it through ambition that we take on something new? Are we generally inspired by what we already do? To overcome a challenge and beat our inner fear, we must push beyond our limits until we find we're there. Just because you haven't done it doesn't mean it can't be done. Take a challenge at face value and simply make it fun. Your mind's the biggest barrier to what you can achieve. If you can overcome it, there's nothing that you'll leave. Free your mind from expectation. Let your body take control. Excel through apprehension. You'll find you're on a roll. Choose life the way you live it and realize your dreams. Since when you take it on, it's not as hard as it first seems. Standing in the future, you'll see how far you've come, and only then will you have proven that it always could be done.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Thank you. Please reach out.